Good evening. My name is Suzette Diamond, and I am the Vice President of Financial Resource Development at Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey. Tonight's program is about journeys. The contemporary Jewish religious experience is a two-way street. Some people, Baalei Teshuva, are attracted to a more religious observance, but traffic also flows the other way. We admire the courage of those that determine to change the course of their own life. The human experience is complex, leading us to all see the world differently and choose various paths to practice our faith. We learn from each other, and most importantly, we respect each other. Tonight's program is relevant, and we thank you for choosing to spend an hour of your time with Federation. But before we start the program, allow me to share with you some important information. Federation's work is vast and impactful. Sometimes it's hard to share in one conversation the enormity of work that Federation does in our community. We often talk about feeding hungry seniors, helping disadvantaged populations, and building Jewish identity in young people and young families. We talk about advocacy work with law enforcement and elected officials. We talk about fighting anti-Semitism and keeping our community safe. And now, during this pandemic, we talk about keeping our community connected through virtual programs like we are presenting tonight. Our mission, plain and simple, is to protect, serve, and sustain our Jewish community. Often, I ask friends, can you even imagine what our community would look like without our Federation? I certainly cannot. But Federation's work all circles back to you. Yes, you. Your generosity and that of others in our community enables Federation staff and volunteers to continue their incredible work. If you have made a gift this year, we thank you. If you have not, it's not too late. Every dollar we raise is crucial and helps to make our community better. For example, your gift of $18 buys 4 kosher meals for a homebound senior. Your $40 donation provides a Jewish child with a year-long subscription to high-quality Jewish books, and a $100 contribution will provide 20 KN95 masks for a frontline worker at one of our partner agencies, such as the Jewish Home at Rockley or Daughters of Miriam. This is a difficult time. We know things feel uncertain, but we are asking you tonight to make a gift to Federation as an investment in the certainty of our future. We appreciate your consideration and hope you will consider making a donation tonight through our website, jfnnj.org/donate. Thank you. And now, allow me to introduce our prestigious panel. Moderating tonight is Lonnie Santo, the Executive Director of Footsteps, an organization that supports and affirms individuals and families who chose to leave ultra-Orthodox communities. Under her leadership, Footsteps' profile has expanded to reach the pages of the New York Times and the screen of Netflix, which debuted One of Us, an award-winning documentary about 3 courageous Footsteps members. She currently sits on the Upstart Advisory Council and was named to the Jewish Week's 36 Under 36 list in 2015. Malki Goldman, one of our panelists tonight, is an actor and artist currently based in New York City. She was born and raised in a Yiddish-speaking home in Jerusalem. She has previously appeared in several films and shows, including the New York Times Critics' Pick, God of Vengeance, as well as the new Netflix series, Unorthodox. Her most recent work includes a few indie films, as well as the Hasidic horror film, The Vigil, which is being released in theaters this month in the United Kingdom. Pesach Eisen is a psychotherapist and researcher who focuses on the intersection of religious disaffiliation and mental health. In his work, Pesach aims to improve the quality of life of those who are harmed by and/or choose to leave organized religion. Our panel is happy to answer questions. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and questions will be fed to them after the presentation. Without further ado, Lonnie, Malki, and Pesach, I'll turn it over to you.
Suzette, thank you so much for having us, and to the Federation of Northern New Jersey, we're really so grateful for the invitation to speak. My name is Lonnie Santo, as Suzette shared. I'm the Executive Director of Footsteps, and we hope that tonight, by the end of the evening, you'll have a more nuanced understanding of the journey out of ultra-Orthodoxy and the triumphs and the challenges of that journey. I've had the privilege of serving as Executive Director of Footsteps for over a decade now, and I could share that it's been such an honor to be a partner and a witness to thousands of individuals. Footsteps has served close to 2,000 individuals directly and helped to build a network of folks who have left or are contemplating leaving ultra-Orthodoxy that's well above 5,000. And we really are there to support and affirm individuals and families who have made the decision to leave, or if they're thinking about leaving, we're just there to provide a listening ear. Ultra-Orthodox communities in pursuit of a self-determined life. And that means a lot of different things to different people. The supports that we provide at Footsteps are practical, emotional, and social supports so that individuals can explore their own identities and figure out what community connections mean to them, and really not only survive, but thrive in their new lives. One of the really important values that we have at Footsteps is the concept of choice, or bechira. There's a space where it's so important to support people who are making their own decisions authentically without judgment. And we come from a place of really respecting all choices that people make in their new lives, or in the decision to stay, if that's their where they're coming from. Footsteps is often seen as a lifeline for those who are part of the community that we serve. We're providing a safe space for them to process their questions. They access mental health services, get practical supports, including scholarships for education, guidance around jobs, financial counseling, legal supports through partnerships, and all of this is surrounded by people who really get where they're coming from. Professional staff and a community of fellow folks who leave, often called an OTD community, a community of folks that are off the derech, if you will. That's self-proclaimed language by many that you might hear out there. And there's no better way of really understanding the nuances of this journey than hearing directly from those who have experienced it. So tonight we're going to hear largely from Malki and Pesach, and you just heard about their bios from Suzette. And they both have the lived experience of leaving ultra-Orthodoxy, and they also have professional experiences utilizing that experience to engage in the world in different ways, and they can share how they do that throughout the conversation. The way that we're going to do the program is that I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to have a conversation with Pesach and Malki for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And I believe that we will be taking a look at the Q&A about 30 minutes into the program now. So I think I will start with a question that, you know, for many people that you've recently seen the docu-series or film series Unorthodox on Netflix, and in that series, Esty got on a plane and left for Germany. And one of the questions that I'm really curious to hear from you about is your process of leaving. For you, was it a dramatic moment where it became clear that you needed to leave, or was it a more gradual decision? What did that look like for you each? How about Pesach start, and then we'll turn it over to Malki.
Thank you, Lonnie, and thank you, UJA. I hope that's the proper acronym for hosting this event. So that's a pretty common question. Why did you leave, or when did it happen? And I'll only speak for myself. I'll say for most people that I've spoken to or interacted with or seen as a therapist, it's extremely gradual rather than overnight, but I will speak mostly about myself. My personal journey is more on the longer part of the spectrum. And I would say that for me, I identify it as a lifelong journey, actually. So it's not, I woke up one day and I was like, I'm tired of this, I'm out of here. And then the next day, I lived a new life. For me, I conceptualize it as, first of all, the initial leaving took over 10 years from when the first seed entered my head, till I sort of stood on firm ground in the secular world. But I see it as a lifelong journey. So I see it as a journey of, unlearning and learning and growing and constantly evolving till the day I'm no longer here. So the short answer is it was more of a gradual journey than a overnight one thing happened kind of journey. And the longer answer is more of, I personally believe that very few people do it overnight, because even if it looks like it's overnight, it's been brewing in their head for a very long time. So my personal journey was gradual. Most people that I speak to about it, their journey was gradual. And overall, I conceptualize it as a lifelong gradual journey. I feel like
For you,
some
Pesach,
part
yeah, I had a follow-up question. What were those early questions that you had, and at what age was that? Like, paint us a picture. Where were you when you had those initial questions that were in your head that you recall?
Yeah. I guess the questions started in childhood already. I think most children have questions. It's one of our basic natural instincts, curiosity, that later on by the environment gets squashed. But initially, I think all children are super curious, and the questions started in childhood. Basic questions about things that I thought I couldn't understand. But as the years went on, and everyone's environment is different, but mine wasn't very encouraging of curiosity and challenging the status quo. So over time, I suppressed it and just behaved according to normal operating procedure. But eventually it started becoming undone. And it started, I think, in young adolescence, when I started sort of becoming an adult or starting to become an adolescent, on my way to adulthood, and I had more sort of independence. So I went with a bunch of friends to study in Israel for a few years for high school, and I sort of had this sense of autonomy and independence for the first time. But I didn't know how to name it back then, but that's what it was. And I think psychologically, because I had that kind of independence more than I had before, I sort of let myself go and started asking questions again. But the initial push wasn't intellectual. My questions of faith and my loss of faith happened way later, post facto, after I already left. Initially, it was all about, I can put words to it in hindsight. I think that what pushed me away, or what pulled me away, was I realized that I had a really hard time working through like emotional and mental states of mind within that framework. So the entire topic of mental health was framed as a spiritual problem. So if you're not feeling well, just pray harder. If you would do it right, you would feel better. And it became pretty clear in hindsight that I'm not going to get those needs met within the framework that I was existing in. So that was the initial sort of, something's wrong, I got to go do something else. Yeah.
Thanks, Pesach. Malki, for you, what was it more gradual? Was there a buildup? What was the journey like for you?
Hi everyone, thank you for being here. To answer once again this question short, no, it was not an overnight epiphany. And also I did not know about Berlin. Maybe that would change everything. No, that was a joke. I used to say my journey is very different until I realized no one else has the same. So therefore I will tell you what was personal to me. I grew up number 10 in a family of 14 in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem, in Mea Shearim. And here's where I would say I grew up different, because my father was a rabbi. Therefore, we had an open house. We always had different people coming into the home, and we had different lifestyles. Different people have different lifestyles, and we were early on introduced to this is how we do things, and this is how other people do things. So therefore, even though in my family everyone wears braids, 2 braids only, and black tights only, it's okay if someone else wears a wig or beige tights and so on. So I loved my family. It was just a bundle of joy, a lot of kids, a lot of guests. We were okay with money, and my father loves food. We always had food, and we would break some rules. Like, for example, we would make barbecues in our yard. We didn't tell our friends about that, but this is something. So I thought I had a great life, and I loved it. And it was very easy to be a girl in my family, because if you dressed tznius, which is modest, and you helped my mom in the kitchen, you were good. So it was good, and I was very spiritual. I don't know if I think it was quite early where I decided that maybe a lot of the things we do is exaggerated, and that was because I've seen so many different lifestyles. But I did not want to think about that. I like to be happy. So I went to Satmar school in Jerusalem, where we spoke only Yiddish because Hebrew was forbidden. They did not believe in Zionism and in the Israeli in Israel at all. They were also, I mean, here's what I have to say: they were not pro-Palestine. They were anti-Palestine and anti-Jews, anti-everything. It's only us that are good. So that went well, and then we moved to New York because, as I mentioned, my father is a rabbi, and he was needed in New York because the people needed him much more spiritually. So here I still tell myself that I'm fine, and yes, everything is good. But then comes the time where I have to get married, and I have to. It's not anymore easy to be a girl. It's actually, in fact, really difficult. I have to marry someone. I have to do all of these rules and shave my hair and have a lot of babies and everything that I've seen but didn't actually think of as something I'm gonna do. It was in the back of my mind, and so suddenly became reality. So I brought up this brilliant idea to my parents: how about I don't get married? And and that was really, really shocking to everyone, and therefore they decided that they have to marry me off as soon as possible to the first person that will say yes. I forget to mention that I was a painter at that point, so I was a little bit different. It was a little bit difficult already for me to get engaged. So here was someone that said yes, and they said, okay. And I said no, and they said, nobody's gonna want you, Malki. You're an artist, you're old. I was 22. So I got engaged and therefore decided that I don't want that life anymore, and I don't want to force myself to see the bright side, even though it was good and it was a good life when it lasted, but it wasn't anymore a fairy tale that I was fitting in. So did not think about anything because I didn't know anything. I didn't know about college. I didn't know about anything but my family and just a couple of things around. So all I wanted to is escape what I don't want to do, escape my marriage, escape shaving my hair, which I was so attached to, and but yet I just love my family, and every time I say something, everyone cries and I cry, and it's the whole thing, and I don't want to do that. So I was looking for alternatives, and one of the alternatives was obviously, you know, leaving this world for sure. That's the easiest way out, but I guess I loved life too much. So I was looking for escape. I wasn't looking for jeans or a piano. I was looking to be an actress. I just was looking for some little place that I don't have to do all of these things I don't want to do. And I don't know if that's fate, you know. I think I'm more religious than a lot of the religious people, because I do think it was sent to me. I was reading about footsteps in a magazine, and thought, I want to check that out. And then I was introduced to this whole concept of people actually living a life after saying no to marriage, living a life after saying no to whatever they are forced to do. And that gave me strength to not necessarily start a new life, but actually start a life that is something that I can do and live with and be in my body and in myself. So, you know, I can go on in years, but the process was literally from I did get married and then divorced quite quickly, but then it was just like, what do I want to do in order to survive tomorrow? And then one day I was so, you know, the stress and the thoughts of how to survive and what you want and how it's going to be and how your life is going to be so much that for me, that I wasn't thinking what I want. And then one day I'm at the gym and I just walk out quickly and I'm so lost in my thoughts, and half an hour later I see I'm walking with my pants and I'm like, okay, so I guess now I'm wearing pants on the street, you know? So it was quite gradual. I did not have at all crazy moments. In fact, I wanted them. I wanted to like say, I'm gonna put on my light on Shabbos and my heart will beat, but it wasn't like that. It was just like one thing at a time.
Thanks, Malki. So you just started to go back to that point that was sort of this moment, this time when you sort of started to explore what would it mean for me not to live in this world. And I'm curious, Pesach, for you, like, you know, you both left a number of years ago. I don't have the exact count, but for you, Pesach, if you could dig back for yourself and remember that that time period, I'm curious if you could speak to, you know, what was most challenging for you about the initial actions around physically leaving, and then what was most fulfilling? I know
Thank
that's
you,
a
Lonnie.
broad question, but
yeah, I feel like every question is fostering a conversation that could take years, but let's give it a shot. So I think the challenges changed. It's always something different. It's different in the beginning, it's different in the middle, it's different later on, and there's no one specific challenge along the way. I think initially the biggest challenge was receiving this message from the environment that if you challenge the status quo, even in your head, you're a bad person. So I think that was the initial thing that I struggled with internally was bad thoughts, bad feelings. You know, it's happening because you're not praying hard enough. So just like basic, simple human phenomena, I felt guilty about based on the fact that my environment taught me so. So I think that was initially the hardest thing. Another big, very difficult thing that I still struggle with today, because like Malki, I love my family. I don't like to broadcast personal stuff, but to gloss it over, it's something I struggle with today, which is whatever my opinion is or their opinion is, families feel hurt when you leave. And it's something that you have to live with. Even though you know you're right, you're wrong, it doesn't matter. Subjectively, people are being hurt. So I think that would be the biggest thing that I struggled with for a long time and still do somewhat, because it's people that I love. And I don't want them to be hurt, you know. And the most rewarding thing was, it's just this freedom to be able to think whatever you want. I think it sounds simple, but not feeling bad about thinking things. It sounds so simple. Spontaneous thoughts are okay. Whatever pops into your head, that's fine. It's just neurons firing. There's nothing inherently evil about you for thinking things. And I think that's the most rewarding part that's just freed up my mental state. I can think what I want. Wow. Yeah.
thanks, Pesach. So Malki, I'm going to shift up the question a little bit for you, and ask, you know, in those early days when you were first leaving and actually remember Malky called Footsteps in my first like month at Footsteps, if that's okay to share. It was almost 10 years ago. I'm curious, you know, from that point, you know, when you were reading about Footsteps in that newspaper, you hadn't known about it. So often people do know about Footsteps beforehand, and we can talk a little bit about the myths that people hear maybe later on, but you hadn't really heard about it back then. And maybe you had some hopes in terms of things that you would get, and then looking back now on your journey, you know, you gain certain things from being a part of a network and of an organization. I'm curious what you had hoped to get and what was most valuable to you about being connected to this organization and network.
Yeah, this is really interesting, because when Pesach said something about having your own thoughts. So I remember when I read about Footsteps, which also I read it in the Yediot Achronot, which was in Hebrew, and my mom didn't read Hebrew due to growing up in Jerusalem, I guess, I don't know. So she let me have the paper. I wanted to call just because I was in surviving mode. I didn't really call like this is going to be my thing. I just like I went to get rat poison, I also was going to call these other people, because I needed to know that in case I can't deal with it, then I just want to know everything I can do. So I called Footsteps, knowing everything that my parents have always told me about every person that had left the community ended up killing themselves or being on drugs, and also that all the secular people want is for us to leave and for us to not be religious anymore because they're jealous. And it made sense to me when I was 5 and 6, but that's it. But in the back of my head, I did not think that anyone that doesn't look like us at that point is my ally, but I wanted to call. So I called and I asked, and I said, you know, I'm engaged and I'm getting married in like a few months. And I remember the social worker at that time said, congratulations. And so why are you calling? And I thought, hey, I was expecting her to say, oh my God, come, we will have you separate. Then we will just like go away from this family who is so religious. And I said, because I don't want to get married. Because I don't want to get married. And she's like, do you want to talk about that? And I said, yeah, I think. And she said, okay, we'll make an appointment. And her not saying, oh, what? All of these things that I was expecting her to say, and like give me bacon on a plate and say everything religious is bad. She just asked me, and I said, I have to get married to this guy because my family, you know, they're public figures and we do things this way, and my mom wants, and I told my father what my father said, and then my brother told me, and she said, but Malky, what do you want? And then I'm like, what? No, I don't know. Me? Wait, oh, I don't know. And I think I started crying. I was like, I don't want any of this. I just want out. And she said, you know, if that's what you want, we can help you. But if you want to stay, we'll just help you with whatever you wanted. And I just couldn't understand that. And then I did, in fact, end up getting married. And it helped me. It's funny, I was just writing about this, where on my wedding day, I had a conversation with her where she checked in if I was okay, if I was good. And I was saying, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. And she said, nothing is right or wrong, Malky, you know, take 1 minute at a time. And it was also giving me more space in my head to say, maybe it will work. Maybe my father is right. Maybe it is. I just suddenly felt grounded and on the floor. And I thought, what do I want? And then maybe I thought, okay, maybe I do want to get married. And it became about me, and it made everything a little bit more grounded. I'm not going to say easier. It was still horribly bad. You know, getting married to someone. I know people in the community don't understand that because it's like a lottery. Some people, it works for some and it doesn't, but getting married to someone you don't want is not easy one way or another. but it was easier to do it when two of my feet were on the floor, and I'm grateful for that. Oh, wait, so what I got from Footsteps, when I got there, I was expecting them to say everything you want, everyone religious is not good, and we are the best. They didn't do that. But what I did get is a community and a family and people that understand me and get where I come from and accept me for who I am and just laugh with me and cry with me. And even if the belief system is different or thoughts or political agreement, even we disagree, but there is some commonality that we have. I got from Footsteps, my boyfriend, my best friends, the people that I care for, the people that I would turn when I feel lost. And in fact, what was really strange, not during COVID, because I left a long time ago, and I like to think about myself as, I have a life for myself, I have a nice place, and I make enough money to pay my rent and to put a little savings aside. But then COVID happens, and I think, okay, good, this is why I have savings for times like this. Great, thought about it. But it goes on longer than I thought, and I could not get any support. And of course, I can't go to my family, even though I mentioned my father is okay. He could help, but he did make it clear a long time ago that he would help me anytime if I come home and turn my life around. Now I have a life and a career that I don't want to turn around because of that, but I also thought I was going out of my mind. And everyone I work with is like, oh yeah, my family, they're gonna chip into my rent. So put my pride aside, and I reached out to Footsteps month 2, and I was like, I'm really drowning here, I don't know what to do. And then within 24 hours, I got a straight deposit to my bank and to help me with my rent. And more than helping with the rent, which I'm sure if I would write to the landlord, maybe he would let me push it off for another few months. But even just the thought that I have a backbone, which is usually what families are to their kids, that's what Footsteps is for me. And I know they offered me scholarships and help with my education and all of this along the line, but what is to me the most prominent, if that's the right word, is what just happened. It just reminded me that I'm not alone, and I do have something that we lose when we leave the community.
Thanks, Malki, for sharing so vulnerably. Pesach, you've been on the other side of this also for over a year now. You were a member of our social work team and our clinical team at Footsteps now. And I'm curious, two things, and you could speak from your own story, or you could speak from what other people share with you about just like what people are initially looking for when you meet with them, and what they express back to you after some time. And then if you could also comment on what you've seen in this environment. Malki shared about some of the impact of being years out and even having some savings, but it not going far enough and not having the family to rely on during a crisis, an economic crisis like this. I'm curious, so those two questions for you. First, initially, what are people looking for, and what do you find is most valuable to them? And then also, what have you seen in this COVID environment? And I'll let people know after this. I think we're going to go to Q&A. So if you want to start to feed your answers in, we're going to, I have a colleague passing them along to me that will look through them and try to get to as many of them as possible.
Thank you, Lonnie. And thank you, Malki. I'm hearing parts of your story, even though I know you well, that I've never heard. So thank you. I'll speak about myself first, because it just feels more right to, rather than talking about others and what they share with me. So I initially sort of quote unquote left the community, which sounds like an event, but is more like years in the making. And I didn't know that Footsteps existed. All I lived with was something's not right. I need something different, and I'm failing to make that happen, because those who deviate from the path fail miserably. That's all I had to work with. So I really struggled for many, many years. And then I heard about this book called Unchosen by sociologist Hella Winston. And I was like, oh, there's a book about somebody who left Orthodox Judaism. I gotta get my hands on that. So I took it out from the public library and started reading it. And first of all, it sort of opened my mind because it was written about somebody who grew up in the same sect as I did, which was Babov, which is Hasidic. And I was like, wow, people who leave aren't just empty shells of misery. This guy has a story. Maybe, maybe there's more to people who leave. That's one part that really started expanding my mind and made me realize that no, not everyone who leaves is an empty shell of a person and ends up in misery. Halfway into the book, I'm reading about this guy that he went to this organization called Footsteps to get his GED. Before reading
Okay, it looks like Pesach's internet might have frozen.
Yeah, what's the last thing you heard?
The GED.
Okay, so I'm reading about this guy that he went to Footsteps to get his GED, and up until that point, it didn't really cross my mind that I was sort of denied an education. I was like, yeah, people get an education, people don't get an education, I can become an entrepreneur, sell houses, it didn't occur to me that I was actually, something was missing, that most people who don't grow up like that have sort of a solid foundation. And it sort of lit a light bulb in my head, because within the system, I was actually a good student for the most part. I enjoyed learning, and I always enjoyed that stuff. And I was like, GED, huh? And I sort of floated around in my head for a while, and I was like, I think I want that. So I just reached out to Footsteps. That book basically informed me about Footsteps. I reached out to Footsteps, and 6 months later, with Footsteps' help, I had a GED. And
what was the book,
Pesach?
Can you share the name of the book?
Oh, I guess I shared it when I was frozen. It's called Unchosen by Hella Winston. And this sounds like a simple story, right? I read in a book, I want a GED, and I went and I got a GED. But it's way bigger than that. What I discovered, first of all, from getting a GED is that it's not just a GED. It's a key that opens the door to your future. Academically, career-wise, you can pursue professions now. And it was a big deal for me. It was way more than the GED. It opened the portal in my head of like, you can go to college. And before I had that, it didn't even cross my mind. Not I can't go, but it didn't even enter my consciousness. So the GED was more than the GED, and it sort of opened a portal in my head. The second part was this narrative that I had stuck in my head that you leave, you fail, you're misery. Finding Footsteps, and for the first time in my life, witnessing hundreds of people, doing what I'm in the process of doing. And, it's hard. That's the understatement of the century, but they're trying to make a life for themselves. And they're not sort of living in the gutter, just in plain misery. People becoming doctors, people starting businesses, people finding love, just like basic stuff. They're living their life. And that opened sort of another portal in my head of like, that narrative is wrong, maybe, that if you leave, you fail miserably. Because I see with my eyes that that's not true. So just stumbling upon Footsteps, both academically and both personally and emotionally, was more than just stumbling upon Footsteps. It opened a portal of possibility in my head that wasn't there before. And I can't even articulate what that meant. It changed the trajectory of my life. So Footsteps helped me a lot. I joined in 2011, so it's been almost 10 years, and pursued an education, and everybody has their own path. That path sort of tickled my pickle. That was what I wanted to do. And eventually I realized how much Footsteps has helped me and how much help I've gotten through therapy. And when I went to graduate school to pursue a master's in mental health counseling, and we had to do a second-year internship and find a clinical fieldwork location to do it, it was a no-brainer for me. I filled out only one application and just submitted it. And I was like, I'm putting all my eggs in this basket. Let's see what happens. And I got it. And it just felt so surreal for me. Surreal doesn't even articulate what it felt like. Looking back 10 years ago, walking in, like a shell of a person, not knowing what's happening, so disoriented. And then a decade later, walking in, with a capability to maybe help others heal. It was a shock to my system that I'm still processing, sort of living, it's almost like a fantasy that came true. So I got lucky that when I graduated, Footsteps is like, we maybe want you to work here. And I was like, yay. So I got hired by Footsteps full time, and it just gives me so much drive in my life, knowing that, the hope that I learned to have, that it's possible to rebuild, even though a certain life didn't work for you. I just am galvanized to inject that in others, that they have a chance. They don't have to settle for the life they were told about. And while it works for a lot of people, admittedly so, absolutely, it doesn't work for everyone, and people should know that if that doesn't work for them, they can rebuild and create a different life. And I just feel like it's vital to do that work, and I just want to be part of it forever.
Great.
Some stuff sorry, are we not talking about COVID?
We are, yeah. We should go to COVID, and then we're gonna turn to the Q&A right after that.
Sure, I'll make it brief. So this journey is easy for some, difficult for most, and even without COVID, it's extremely challenging to, reclaim your identity, unlearn stuff, go to school, find housing. The list goes on and on and on. It takes a lot to have a rebirth and recreate a new life. So you need so much support in that process. So if you add the layer of COVID, it affected that process in many ways for many people who are on their journey. A is that people who are sort of in the beginning stages of their journey or in the middle, even if they lived within the environment that they no longer wanted to live in, they can sort of create pockets in their life where they get to be themselves, whether they go to school, go to work, hang out with friends, but that's no longer available during COVID. So they don't create these pockets of release, of sanity, where they can be themselves. Another part is that a lot of people sort of have to be taught that slow and steady ends up more successful than just jumping off the building and hoping someone will catch you. And that's without COVID. With COVID, I'm telling them you have to slow down even more. You can't necessarily get that job you want to. You can't move out now. And it slowed down their already turtle speed journey, which is extremely frustrating. And there's a whole list of things that it got affected because of COVID that made the difficult journey already more difficult. But I'll end on a positive note, which is that COVID sort of revitalized remote Zoom meetings. And now people who live in different states or even internationally, or people who are in a certain state of mind where they can't make it to in-person therapy now have access to all of that. And so many people have been helped because we now do meetings on Zoom and they can just tap in from anywhere. So I think that's a major positive thing that we should consider continuing even after COVID's over.
Thank you. So there's a question about, there are a lot of questions that we're not going to get to, but I have permission from our folks on the other end to go a little bit past 9, but I want to honor everyone's time. We want to honor everyone's time. So we'll probably just get through a couple of questions. I'm curious, there's a question about, aside from family, and you both reference family, so is there anything that you missed from your Orthodox life? if you would like, you can also talk about family if that's the main thing that you miss, or how you're connected.
I guess I'll go first. Yes, there's a lot of things I like. I like the sense of knowing where you're going and what you're doing and why, sense of belonging and sense of being, you know, having a purpose without me creating it. I do miss my family very much, though. I see them a lot and we have a great relationship. We don't talk about anything I do other than this. Everything is great. And of course I dress up according to all the rules when I go home. I miss a nice Shabbos meal, but I do this with my friends. And I think lately I've learned to do the things I miss, because it almost, I left to not do the things I don't want. So thankfully, if I want to make a Shabbos meal, I have my friends from Footsteps and they know all the songs and they like the food and they love gefilte fish. So we do that. So we get to recreate a lot of the things. I think mainly is just the knowing what's next and having the next step ahead. But that's also what excites me. It keeps me alive and not having that. So it's kind of like a bad day, I miss it. A good day, I forget about it.
Thanks, Malky.
In a nutshell, I miss everything sometimes. That's how nostalgia works. It's sort of like looking back at an old flame that didn't end well, but you miss the good parts. That's how I would package it in the elevator pitch version. What I miss the most is the connections that I have. They were different. You know, when we were the same, we could just be ourselves and connect on a very intimate level. Now it's sort of, I can't bring my full self to the interaction because doing so just will kill the relationship. It just doesn't feel the same. So I just miss the authenticity and intimacy of both relationships with my former community, former friends, and family. But I miss everything sometimes because that's how our emotions work and nostalgia exists. But then I remind myself that I'm just have a better quality of life personally now. So it's natural to miss it, and if I miss something specific, like Malky said, I can do it and incorporate it into my life now. That's the short answer.
Thanks, Pesach. That piece around figuring, like missing being authentic with family and people who you're close to is a really important distinction, because we get that question, the question of, and I think that there's often an assumption that's put out, to take off my moderator hat and talk as what I've seen as Footsteps executive director for a decade, that like there's often an assumption that there's not a relationship with family, when most often there is. And I think that what's most challenging for people is that they find that they can't bring their full self to the table, because that it's not necessarily something that would help that interaction, like both Malky and Pesach alluded to. And so they hold relationships, but they look different with folks back in the community that they come from. So there's some very deep questions that you might have to think about how to answer succinctly here. But there's questions, I'll combine two questions, which is how can you both, like, can you identify within yourself what's made you so resilient? That piece around resilience is true for most people who leave. We see immense resilience and self-determination, I'll add. And then alongside with that, is there a specific personality that you've seen that gravitates towards this type of thinking and towards leaving the community? So I'll combine those two questions about resilience and the personality types that leave. And maybe because Pesach works in the area of the mind, and he might take that one because this is your area of study, perhaps.
Yeah. We don't know much about the mind. We think we do. I think the first one is easier, which is, you know, people call us resilient and heroes and all of those buzzwords. Sometimes I feel like I wish I weren't a hero. I wish leaving were simpler. I don't want to be anyone's hero. I want people to be able to choose their life and be supported by the people who are supposed to protect them. So this resilience has an implication that something went wrong and you're supposed to climb out of it. And that in an ideal world, we shouldn't have to be resilient. I think that everyone's resilient. I think that everything that's alive, whether it's a tree or a human being, finds a way to grow between the cracks if nurtured properly. So I think that in isolation, I don't have resilience. Because I got the proper support and people helped me move the obstacles out of the way is where the resilience started to grow. So maybe I confused everyone even more. In a nutshell, everyone's resilient with the right nurture. The other question of certain personality types, I'm not even gonna go there because we don't have the information. Whatever I said would be pure speculation. But I do want to point out that people talk a lot, and this event sort of lays on the theme that there is sort of a theme of leaving religion. And there are a lot of themes, but everyone's story is completely unique and different, just like every one of the world's story is completely unique and different. So when we talk about these themes and personality types, while interesting and fascinating, I feel like it's important to wrap it up with, but everyone is extremely different. And rather than assuming things, stereotypes, I want to hear your story rather than sort of coming in with a preconceived notion.
Great. Thanks. There's a question that we commonly get that's coming in about whether formerly ultra-Orthodox folks ever join other movements of Judaism, like Reform or Conservative. And I think that, you know, what I'll speak from what I've seen is that what we tend to see a lot more of in the early years is that people are going through a journey where they have to figure out what they want to take and what they want to leave behind, and all in individual decisions in different moments in time, and that is something really important to respect. There are certainly people who join certain synagogues here and there, but we tend not to see as many people joining movements or denominations, because you tend to have more just individualistic thinkers who might have been let down by a particular movement, right, of like ultra-Orthodox Judaism. And so they tend not, this is just my experience as executive director, people tend not to gravitate to a denominational Judaism as opposed to like figuring out what Judaism means to them, like you heard both Malki and Pesach sharing. So that's my short answer to that question. I don't know if Pesach and Malki, you have anything you want to add to that, but it's a common question that we get when speaking to audiences, and you're happy to have you jump in if you have another question, another comment there.
If Malki wants to take a stab at it, I'll mute myself, but I have something to say. Similar to what I said earlier, the question implies that people don't seek out other denominations. Like, why does everybody who leaves reject everything? Well, not everybody does. Just as there are people who completely leave, and whether they identify as secular Jewish or not even Jewish at all, I don't know if it's an equal amount, but there's quite a few who still go to Reform, Conservative, Reconstructionist, and it's a stereotype, I believe, that people who leave completely, because there are people who leave in every flavor and framework imaginable. That's the short answer.
Thanks.
Yeah, I do want to say this is so strong of thinking all the people do, the people don't do. Individualistically, everyone does something else. I do believe, though, that sometimes if you come from a place where there's so many restricting rules and like for instance, where I grew up, speaking one word Hebrew is as bad as idol worshipping 100 times, then you don't necessarily feel connected to a little bit less rules. You just don't see it the same, but that's personally for me. But I am spiritual, and then my boyfriend is not, and then my best friend is religious, and my other, not religious, but considering being one day, and who knows, maybe one day I change my mind once again. But as long as we know that we can live and we can make choices along the way. I never heard someone saying, I left, I'm never going to be religious. I will never, everyone in whatever state of being they are and what feels right in the journey that we take from coming from one extreme to where we land.
Okay, there's a follow-up question, and I'll take it, and then we have to do a couple of wrap-up questions. I do want to respect people's time on this. To speak to parents who might have raised children who've, if you said, like, gone off, and how they could help from feeling like it's a disappointment. I know I certainly have had that with my, I grew up from as well, and that's a challenge, I think, for every parent who raises their child to be Orthodox, for most, whether it's ultra-Orthodox or otherwise. But what advice would you have to parents who feel like maybe they're failing in what they had hoped to have for their children, which is, any of you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah,
I'll
take a quick, deep stab at it. I think that I think I read it. Somebody said Masorah, which is tradition. I think that, yes, I left and I'm no longer observant, but I did continue the Masorah. My Masorah is just the lessons that I learned are different. I don't think so much about, how much I observe. I think more about the lessons I've learned from my family, which is look after each other. When you believe in something, pursue it to the fullest. Lessons like that I perceive as me continuing the Masorah. So what I would tell parents is, this kind of concept exists in the whole world. Like when a dad's a doctor, they get disappointed when their son becomes an accountant. You just have to realize that your kid is actually an autonomous human being and not sort of an extension or reflection of you. And the only reason why they are that way is because the environment you live in framed it like that. But they're their own person. And the most important thing is that they treat others well, not, how many times they pray a day. Their behavior toward others is more important than their observance. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, and I'll say if there's someone in particular that's wondering about resources on that, if you email info@footstepsorg.org, we certainly have people, therapists and counselors out there that we know that work with parents of people who leave as well. So feel free to reach out to us on that front. There's a question about whether Footsteps only serves Hasidic people. No, we serve people who identify as having left ultra-Orthodox backgrounds. So that would include Litvish. It's rare, you asked about modern Orthodoxy. It's rare for people who are modern Orthodox to reach out to Footsteps. Usually there's some sort of point at which there's like very, very minimal familial and community support, really, for living some sort of different path. And while certainly, and I grew up modern Orthodox, some of that exists in modern Orthodoxy, it tends not to be as much for those who have left modern Orthodoxy. So the majority of people, every now and again, we have someone who's modern Orthodox who wants to be a part of our programming and support groups. And, we say that most of our programming is really geared towards people who grew up in more insular communities. But if they find, comfort in our support groups, then we don't, deny them that space. But that tends to be the majority of our members are about, usually it's about like 75% Hasidic, 25% Litvish, but that's also changing over the years as sort of the boundaries are shifting between Hasidic and Litvish. And if that language doesn't make sense so much to you, you could feel free to read up on this. I'll go to another question about where our funding comes from. It's from, foundations. Federation of New York has supported us for a number of years, which is why Pesach originally said thanks to you, JA, because he's used to that language. So this is Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey, which is a different federation, I know. So UJ has supported us, a number of other Jewish foundations and secular foundations that support anti-poverty work, as well as about 50% of our funding comes from generous individuals who are philanthropic, and our budget is nearing $4 million with 25 staff these days. A final question about how people could help and get involved. You know, what I would say is that the most you could do, the best thing you could do is to learn more about these stories, share about stories, watch more films. If you haven't watched one of us, Shtiso is a wonderful representation of ultra-Orthodoxy. There are a ton of memoirs out there. If you go to the resources page on our website, which is footstepsorg.org, you could find links to memoirs and videos. If you follow us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, you could find a lot of stories and get down a rabbit hole. I would just say educate yourself, ask people, so from a place of understanding when you meet them, and seeking to understand how to be allies to them, and sign up to join Footsteps mailing list to learn more. And like I said, if you have further questions, you could reach out to info@footstepsorg.org, and one of our team members will get back to you. And at this point, I will turn it back over to Suzette, and just want to say thank you so much to Pesach and to Malki for sharing vulnerably and honestly with this group tonight. And thanks to folks at Federation of Northern New Jersey for inviting us.
Lonnie, Malki, and Pesach, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. This discussion was provocative, entertaining, and insightful. We now have a better, nuanced understanding of your journey and the path that brought you to your place of authenticity and truth. Thanks to all of you this evening for choosing to spend time with Federation. We have a very robust calendar of virtual events and are happy you were able to join us. Remember, Federation's work goes far beyond virtual programming, and we need you to help us continue building and sustaining our community. Please help and donate tonight at jfnnj.org/donate. Toda rabah, have a wonderful evening and stay safe.